Good day, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Alex Sass Show here at the Glen Zone with Glenn Herring. And today is an amazing show as usual. And per my request and your will, you are subscribing, sharing, clicking all the likes, and sharing us on all your socials because we are growing. We are growing with you. Well, today is a good show, and we're just gonna circle back on a few things. There's a lot of riots happening in France for the past how many years? Not even months. But there's a new event that happened, and 17-year-old got shot by the police, and we'll talk more about it. But why is it significant for us here in North America, in United States and Canada? Also, Uganda is suing France. We'll talk about that. And there's another scandal with Hunter Biden WhatsApp messages to Chinese. Like, okay, we have a laptop full of stuff and we're still talking about releasing one message at a time. And you still do not believe it's a theater. And you still do not believe whatever happened in Russia in the last few days with this revolt. So supposedly Wagner revolted against Putin, and there was going to be, we'll show you why it's a theater as well. There's a lot of evidence came out, and as well why you should never listen to the legacy media telling you things like, oh, Putin fled Moscow and all this other stuff. So we'll get back to you on all those news in just a second. Glenn, how you doing? What do you know about France? What's going on in France right now?
Well, what's going on in France is indicative of what's going on in many, many places in the world. We said that this was going to speed up. There's anarchy everywhere. There's uprisings. And it's amazing today how little things can become such big things. And it's like a little flame can become a huge fire all of a sudden because people are on edge. People don't know what's going on. And their reactionary mind is what's taking over control.
But I believe what happened in France specifically is because the people on edge over many, many things that have been happening for the past few years. It doesn't take much to just be pushed over the edge. And this was a significant event. There's a video online of this kid getting shot. You can watch this for yourself. So there's some kind of traffic stop, and they have the guns pointing at the kid. And as he start moving, the police just released that shot and basically killed the guy.
Yeah, we don't know if that's true. That could be theatrics also, obviously, to add to all the theatrics. But the story goes, it's a 17-year-old. He doesn't have a driver's license. He's been charged many times. He's been caught many times for evading the police, driving erratically, putting other people's lives at risk. So, sometimes you play with fire, you're going to get burned. And unfortunately, a young fella, I don't know.
But does he deserve to get shot?
No, he doesn't deserve to get shot. If you know who he is, or you just catch him and then, you pull him in and that's it. You're going to spend some time in here and, we're going to work on you a little bit. But no, the young guy being shot like that, no wonder people are protesting. But the protest erupts now over everything. That's indicative of people at their limit. When they lose everything and there's nothing left for them to lose, then they lose it. And it's showing everywhere. And, we're going to be seeing that in North America a lot too, obviously.
They set the government building on fire as a result. So it's escalating. It's not just like, okay, let's go outside and carry banners around and, do pride events. No, people actually revolting. The mainstream media doesn't really want you to see it because they don't want to give you any ideas or what you can be doing here in the West. And by the way, brothers and sisters, Glenn had a really excellent point today when he said the revolution starts in your hearts. You don't need to go out there and burn and break buildings. Start revolution at your home. You are leader at your house. At least align your family with your values and ideas. What are your values? What are your ideas? Are your kids being raised properly? And that's how you start the revolution, right? Although, like you said, who am I to say, in France, they being under dictator like we have been here in Canada with Justin Castro, and people had enough. And the next episode that will cover that, with all those pride events and all those taxpayer money and all this debauchery and degeneracy being pushed in people's faces. People had enough, and protesting, people coming together. But to be fair, I think it's still all a theater and distraction from what really is going on. And what's going on is the war on people, Glenn. And here in United States, well, here we're not in the United States. Biden's story is prevalent, but not so long ago, last week actually, we covered Uganda being sanctioned by U.S. because they weren't towing the party line, which is Trudeau's responsibility, and G7 committee, LGBTQ stuff. They unilaterally rejected it, the people of the country, and made all those things illegal. And now, after the sanctions, Uganda said, well, you're going to do this, we're going to sue you over some colonial stuff. And they sued France. It's tat for tat kind of thing. And I think they're only doing this now because people are sick and actually have the support. And now there's other systems in place like BRICS that countries are no longer afraid to speak up and move against the colonial owners. Is that a true assessment, Glenn?
Well, history will tell you that Uganda was being controlled, obviously, by the French Empire, and their policies, their government policies, was not for the people. It was for the benefit of the Empire of France. And so Ugandans have been oppressed and suppressed throughout history. And now, while the global order is starting to change, and a lot of the older empires are losing their power and their significance in the world, many countries are starting to push back, and they might be making allegiances with the new powers that be.
Yeah, and the reason for that is, like I said, I believe because of systems like BRICS, new monetary systems outside of IMF, outside of BIS and EU, because there's another story that we're going to cover lately where EU central bank is demanding for other banks to pull out other markets like Russia because, either for political reasons or otherwise. And now it's pendulum sort of swinging, and Europe finds itself on the other end where Africa was, which is interesting to see. And it's clearly, this is the evidence of how the West is being destroyed intentionally. It is a building 7. It is demolition of the Western world. And the reasons, like, the Biden story, Glenn, like if you see that now they found another, WhatsApp message to the China, and there's a whole laptop full of stuff. Why don't you just release that? And we know why don't they release that, because of BI is covering for that and all this stuff, and the spoon feeding this so-called political theater here in the West. And I guess if all of this would be released at once, would it be such a enormous shock to people, or it's straight up just a theater continues, Glenn?
Well, you could make it what you want, but it looks like Biden is in trouble. His family and him are in trouble for taking money for bribes, working with other countries. That's treason. And it's obvious now, it's coming out more and more, and there's going to be a lot more, by the way, because they want to do it in increments, that he took a lot more money for bribes from China to affect politics and business in North America. Let's face it, we could call it North America, not just America, United States, because what happens in the United States really affects all of North America, Canada, and Mexico also. And people are going to see the correspondence and the similarities between the Biden people with China and the Trudeau and Trudeau Foundation with China. Except Canadians, we tend to put more attention on what's going on south of the border before we open our eyes and realize what's going on in our own backyard.
Yeah, it's a true assessment. Canadians are still way more asleep than Americans. But okay, here's the message that was uncovered. In WhatsApp exchange dated August 3rd, 2017, Hunter Biden told CEFC associate Zhong Wen-dong, the Bidens are the best known at doing exactly what the chairman wants from this partnership. And like the next day, he got $100,000 deposited in his account in one of his offshore companies. Right. So there's a direct, meddling in. I don't know, Glenn. If you were president, I was your son. Would we have this kind of partnership, you and me? like the cronyism, like I don't know what it is. What would you call it, right? Because the defense that the White House administration has for Biden is like, well, that's his son. What do you want him to do? Like he will defend him. Like of course he'll do business with him and everything else, but it's not business, is it? This is straight up corruption. This is treason. They dealing with a communist party here, and I thought the whole purpose of the Cold War is to get rid of communism, and I never really understood that. Now I do. I understand, because none of that is true. All of that is a theater, political theater, and it's the war on people. They don't care what the political systems are as long as they make money, because it's the corporation that's run the world, not the governments. And corporations don't have borders. So if you still believe and buy into this whole thing, China's communist and poor people there, North Korea, Russia, Canada, there's more authoritarian structure here in Canada now with bills like, its recent bills is like C18 and C11 than any other Western countries in the world, and nobody paying attention. I'm still waiting, Glenn, for the day when United States is going to come and invade Canada and liberate us from the tyrannical Trudeau. But truthfully, this is what the Western world is defending. Specifically the White House is defending, is this guy.
I was just thanking, anyway, I started off without you. And I sold a lot of state secrets and a lot of very important things that we shared.
He's so obnoxious. Obviously, that's a joke. He's clearly was joking, or not. I don't know. Look at Bodhi's face. But he's so arrogant that he can laugh at you. He can laugh at your face saying like, look, I don't care with all the stuff that's going on with my son. This is how I feel about it. You guys all my slaves anyway, and nothing's going to happen to me. And it's a true assessment, because he's been a politician for how many years, Glenn? 60-some years or something ridiculous like that. And
too many.
And do you know what the inflation rate is right now in United States? And actually, we have a table here. Brothers and sisters. And presidential inflation rate. Overall presidential inflation rate by Biden is 15%, and energy is 37%. Compare that to Trump, where overall inflation rate was 4% and energy was 1.6, right? So, and like Biden, the closest person that comes to Biden in terms of inflation is actually Carter, who actually overall rate is much higher than Biden. So it's definitely a distraction of the West, and you can see it. But as long as we play this theater, and today on the radio, just today as I was driving here, Glenn, I heard on a Fearless CGAD channel that brings us all the top news, told us that one of the reasons for inflations here in Canada is the war in Ukraine. I'm glad they didn't mention climate change, just like the central bank's, what's her name, Lagarde. She claimed last week that the climate change is responsible for inflation. In our case here in Canada, we'll blame Russia for inflation in Canada, right?
Yeah. You can basically blame the whole world for the central banks of every country printing money like there was no tomorrow. That is the inflation. This money floats to the top. The uber rich get uber richer. And the middle class is where the wealth comes from, because wealth cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred. So the middle class work on the treadmill of slavery, and all their efforts go towards the elites. This is why the top keep getting richer. And the euro is now in a recession because of all the sanctions imposed on Europe against Russia by Europe. It's the Anglo-American Empire that's controlling the EU, which is controlling the elected officials of all the nations of the euro, telling them what to do. Now the people in those nations are feeling the negative effects from these sanctions against Russia, which, by the way, is making Russia even stronger.
Oh, because they have to get creative, go out of the box and make new partnerships and develop their own industries and be not dependent on the Western world as the Western world wants other countries to be dependent on. But if you look at the picture, brothers and sisters, this is who you trust. This is the central bank. This is the general manager of the central bank, BIS, right? The Bank of International Settlements. It seems like that's one of the qualifications to run the bank. Or is it to be so overweight, or is it unintended consequence of running the BIS, the gluttony, right? Who knows?
That's gluttony and greed. But it's at the same time, all this going on, people are waking up in their countries and they're rebelling, and you see it when every country has an election, whether it's at a regional level or a national level. They seem to be going more conservative, more right-wing style politics, and it's getting rid of the wokest mentality and the extreme left-leaning with socialism, almost communism. Sweden is abandoning their 100% renewable energy ideologies, and Greece just had elections, and they voted in a hard right-liners. Finland had regional elections, and they were surprised that in certain regions it has gone extreme right-leaning. And you're going to notice this more and more as other countries have elections too. So it looks like the left-leaning globalists, the people trying to run the power through the left-leaning governments, it looks like they're losing their abilities and their mandates against the people.
Well, because people are starting to recognize what we're talking about here day in and day out is that your country run by corporations like BlackRock and by people like George Soros specifically, right? And they're vultures. They don't care about you. They're just about to make money. And more destabilized your country is for them to make money. So they waited, for example, like Soviet Union to fall apart. Or not just the Soviet Union, but this whole Soviet bloc. So Eastern Europe, countries like Hungary and Poland. And that's when people like George Soros of the world came in and overtook. I experienced that in Russia when the Soviet Union fell apart. How all those people became billionaires. Well, they were able to make connections for the Western interests come in and privatize the public treasures like those enormous factories or natural resource industries, and they were sold for pennies on a dollar. And even so, those people still made billions of dollars, and they so rich, and they bought themselves yachts, and they moved to London, and they're like, oh, they're such great businessmen. No, they're not. They're traders. And they traded the people and the brothers and sisters' national treasures for coin, right, Glenn? I have actually a video to show you. I don't know here.
Same thing's going to happen in Canada. Okay, the economy is going to collapse here, and then you're going to have wealthy people from all this printed money buying up everything on the cheap. Germany's recession is going to get worse. The Bundesbank, which is the central bank of Germany, saying, oh, it's just a little hard time we're going to go through, but we're going to get out of it rather quickly, like in the second half of 2023. But there's a lot of economists who are not under the central bank control who are saying, oh, this is just getting started and it's going to get a lot worse. Now, Germany is the financial powerhouse of the euro. So if the engine of the euro is conking out or running out of gas, what's that going to leave the rest of the euro? It's the same thing in North America. When that comes over to the American economy and it slows down, what's going to happen to the Canadian and Mexican community?
This is how I feel about this. And I actually mentioned it before a few episodes ago when we talked about this war and people. Okay, so Soviet the whole Soviet bloc, the Soviet Empire, when it fell, that was clear. That was obviously the for vultures for the come in. How the corporations, the corporate interest, how the Black Rocks of the world, how are they destroying Western democracy? Well, they're destroying it by undermining its foundation. So yeah, they started many years ago, and it maybe even started with the communist efforts to undermine the foundation of United States, specifically by destroying the family, by introducing divorce. Believe it or not, that was the first step. Then introducing feminism, then introducing all the gay culture and all that stuff. And now it's the whole transgenderism and transitioning and the pride thing. What happens is they're pushing all this woke credit scores onto corporations. Corporations use power and they use the value on the market, right? The shares drop and those vultures come in and buy it up. And so it's not necessarily to have actually a physical war or physical collapse of the country. It's maybe just an economic collapse of the country. And that's what, Glenn, you're saying is happening. But look, don't take my word for it. You think this is just some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist? No. When people will tell you who they are. Just watch this.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
If you don't recognize who it is, that's the young George Soros. Look at that smug, smirk face on him.
All of the above. All of the above. Yeah. Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do. As a competitor, I've got to compete to win. As a human being, I am concerned about the society in which I live.
He just contradicted himself. I don't care about social consequences, but then as a competitor, I do this, but then, so he's lying out of both sides of his mouth, and he's just telling you straight up, I'm here to make money. I don't care about the people. And brothers and sisters, your brothers and sisters, lesser brothers and sisters who committed to the George Soroses and this whole liberal propaganda, he's just using this whole liberal propaganda. He's sponsoring all those neoliberal judges and politicians and all that stuff to continue to undermine your country. So your country continues to crumble. So then him and other interests like him can come in and buy out your everything, actually, your way of life specifically, and make money of you. And how do they do it? They're doing it by destroying middle class, isn't it, Glenn?
Yeah, exactly. His influence on the system is creating monetary reverberations in an economy where, like I said before, the middle class are losing their wealth. Wealth cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred. So it's transferring over to people like this who are engineering, and then this Soros uses this wealth against the people, and it gets a perpetual problem. It's the cat chasing its own tail in a circle. It's getting worse and worse, and people are starting to feel the effects of this. And the unfortunate thing is the stress that they're feeling now, they don't know where it's coming from, and so they're taking it out on each other. Hence, that's why you see, when people are driving, they're taking frustrations out on each other, or they're so quick to react and argue, and they want to fight. And if they looked past the person beside them and looked with a more peripheral vision how everything is being created and engineered at their expense, then they would unite together and say, we'll put an end to this. And that's the way you have revolution, is to start an awakening process. You don't, and then with this awakening process, you don't start fighting against the things that you dislike. You pro the things that you do like. So this fight for the things that you do like or do agree with, it becomes less like fighting and more like a peaceful movement. This is how we get things done the right way, the humanitarian way, and we find ourselves again.
Excellent, Glenn. This is an amazing point. Well, if you see the things are speeding up, and don't let the good crisis go to waste. right? So ECB, European Central Bank, tells other European banks who didn't move the assets from Russia yet, wonder why, right? Why now? That's the point. They tell them, well, because of the Wagner thing, like the situation in Russia is even more volatile now. Please move your stuff, move your assets away. And they basically forcing European banks to leave Russia. And is it a smart decision, since the Russia is the strongest economy in Europe still, right? Even with all the sanctions and all the war. So it's clear that those who are in charge of decision making, they want to speed up the process of ruining Europe right now. Destruction of Europe continues, not only on the value level in terms of family values, national values, and everything else, but economically, specifically, as you mentioned, the whole German economic situation, Glenn.
Also, it's starting to look like resemble a controlled banking demolition. In other words, they want to blame banks closing on things like Russia or
climate change,
stuff like this. But in reality, it's the debt. They've incurred too much debt, and that it gets exposes. And then people, of course, they run for the exits when they see that. They want their money out of the accounts. And then the bank goes bankrupt or insolvent. That's where the terminology bankruptcy comes from. It's a bank that's ruptured and it becomes insolvent.
Interesting. Yeah, well, building 7 all over the place, but in terms of the economy. And you know how Ukraine was a test market for a lot of things before the war broke out, including the biolabs, which was supposed to be the conspiracy theory till all that became to the top, and people like Tucker even spoke about it, and it's like, oh, that's actually true, that's not a conspiracy theorist. And then you had even White House commented on that, but now even though Ukraine is still a hotspot in the world, they're going to test it out as the world first cashless society. You would think it would be places like New Zealand, because it's much smaller, controlled environment, an island, and people there a lot more brainwashed and controlled than places like Ukraine, believe it or not. But World Economic Forum is all throughout New Zealand, but in Ukraine, they're going to do this because it is a test market. It's not just a test market for the military-industrial complex and the new weapons and everything else, but also for the cashless society. And why is that important? Because everything we just mentioned is to control you, here in the West. Because if your economy will shift to cashless society, then you're giving away your freedom to do many, many, many things. And now the governments of the world and corporations of the world can control your behavior based on your behavior. If you're being a good soldier, a good citizen, they can shut down your electronic wallet or not. And that's exactly what they did here in Canada during the trucker protest, Glenn.
Yeah, another thing about Ukraine, besides the biolabs, is the reasons why the Anglo-American Empire went into Afghanistan was to control the world's opium supply. And then Turkey was the place that was fencing out this opium. But then they shut that down. And so they moved the fencing operations to Ukraine. But now with the war in Ukraine, they moved it to Germany, actually. So the German economy is being propped up by let's say, dirty money. And that's what's keeping things going for the rich. The middle class are suffering. And here in America, you had the Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, the American central bank, stating that up or around 37% of businesses are on very shaky territory. That's privately owned and publicly owned. In other words, traded on the stock market. I think that figure is a little bit lower than what it should be, but still, that's more than 1/3 of all the businesses that could be facing financial turmoil when it comes to renegotiating their debt and the payment on their debt through interest.
Well, yeah, and this is it, brothers and sisters. It's I don't know what you can do on a global scale to change the world, but you can definitely do something on the local scale and start by your family again. Like if you, we're not here to scare you like the world is collapsing and it's coming to an end. No, we're here to build awareness. We're here to build awareness so you can take proper actions. What are those actions are? If you continue to listen to Alex Ash show and the men's channel on Glanzone, those things will be very clear. You start with yourself, and then your family, and then maybe your immediate community, and then so on and so forth. But let's just play around a little bit with the fake news that we experienced in the last few days. This whole Russian coup and this revolt by Wagner group, and as we recognize and realize that it achieved a lot of things. It exposed a lot of weaknesses and maybe actually deception by some of the Russian generals that could have been either sellouts to the West, or maybe they just want Putin and his cronies want to make money. Maybe that's where that $6.2 billion went, right? But like don't go good crisis go to waste. And where in the West people use it to divide people, Putin took an advantage and actually brought people together. If you've seen his speech, Glenn, this is what it sounded like.
Patience, your consolidation and patriotism. This civil solidarity has shown that any attempts to blackmail us and to spur internal chaos are doomed. We have shown Supreme Consolidation Society and executive authorities of all levels a
Supreme Consolidation Society. The Russians, they came together as a result of the events of the last weekend. So it feels like if you think the West gained something by this, no, they actually lost something. The Russian people came even closer together as a result of that. And to the point where people like blinking, they were spreading some, oh yeah, the Russia's weak, look what's happening, the Putin's on trouble seat. And now you can see that the actual the U.S. diplomats ordered not to discuss Wagner mutiny because it's clearly a hoax. And if you don't believe me, that was all fake, and it was a really good gambit move set up by Putin. The criminal case against Wagner was dropped by FSB. So would you drop a case like this, Glenn, if you had mutiny anywhere in the world against your supreme leader, Putin, who's supposed to be this great dictator and controlling things? And, of course not. He would not. He would punish this person in the most public way possible to deter others from doing the same. But this didn't happen.
Again, this is the fake news media Muppets putting out their propaganda, because the real truth is it wasn't Russia that was facing civil war. It was Ukraine that was in a civil war. It was West Ukraine against the East Ukraine, and the East Ukraine were more Russian, more had a connection to their mother country. And so he eventually had to step in, and they call that an invasion. That's a strong terminology. Of course, that's used here in the West, but that was to demilitarize and denazification of the western part of Ukraine to protect the eastern part of Ukraine. And here at the same time, I'll give you an example about the fake news. The Criminal News Network, also known as CNN, they said that the Wagner mutiny shows Ukraine can win. Really? Wow.
Well, it gets worse. So in New York Times, right? New York Times put that video. That was on June 24th. Vladimir Putin reportedly flees Moscow as Wagner forces advance in Russia. So, but they kind of have to do it because somehow you have to justify trillions of dollars sent to Ukraine of your taxpayer money, and to achieve some kind of result. And this would be partial victory. Look, we scared him. He's running away. Right? That's the victory in any way. That's just because brothers and sisters, doesn't matter where you live in the Western world, you've been fooled again. Okay, we can go like Vietnam, North Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, what else? Syria, Libya, I don't know, Kosovo. Which other wars do you want me to list? Ukraine, all the stuff in Africa, all the stuff in South America. But Ukraine, that's a real thing, right? All this other stuff we know by now, it's been discovered to be just some kind of economic wars, but this Ukraine thing, it's for real. It's to stop Putin, right? Brothers and sisters, you still believe in that? I know you don't. That's why you listen to the show. But yeah, don't listen to the to the legacy media without laughter, but it's also kind of going to tell you, what the real story is. Whatever they tell you, just think opposite, and that's what the real story is. Glenn, you know what the other story is? Remember actually before that happened in Belarus, they had those sort of the equivalent of Arab Springs. They had those Maidan equivalent sponsored events, but the Belarusian president Lukashenko was able to stop that, and I believe the Russians helped him. Same thing happened in Kazakhstan. And the Central Asia, like countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all this stuff around there, the rich of natural resources, and they actually now being, worked on by CIA and other, WEF's interests to undermine Russia, because Russia, since Soviet Union times and before, had strong economic, political, and family ties with those regions. But not so long ago, they started to undermine those relations, so they can actually continue to undermine Russian economy as well, and maybe feed off and drain the the other resources of other countries. Just like George Soros. Like, if you think it's like, oh no, it's there to punish Russia. No, it's there to drain Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan of their resources, of their national treasures and all that stuff, because they don't really care about them. They'll buy things for dimes on it. Like, okay, I'll play you another Soros video if you don't believe me. Here.
When the Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire collapsed, and as the empire collapsed, I moved in and picked up the pieces. First in Hungary in 1984, and then Poland in 87, China in 87 as well. So this is how the Soros Empire was
sounds like Biden
replacing
now.
the Soviet Empire.
Oh, that's why he passed it on to his son.
How do you think you're doing in your imperial ambitions?
Imperial ambitions. They're like, that's the Star Wars. He's the Lord Sith. They're making fun of him. So the idea is the same thing happened in Kazakhstan. Is Russia loses its influence in Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries. And look, this the videos from Asia Society. People like Soros and the empire will come in and like, here, be our friend, because, Russia's bad. Russia can no longer be friends with the West. You don't want to be friends with Russia. You want to be friends with us. Let us give you some money. We'll buy some. We'll invest into your businesses. And then a few years later, when you're drained and your economy is completely dependent on IMF and other organizations, and then you cannot do anything and decide anything for yourself because you're run by people like Soros. Well, what can I tell you, Glenn?
Yeah. Meanwhile, the show keeps going on, and the media here in the West was focusing on the coup. It must be a lot of Russians and the government must have been really worried about that, because they were making a bunch of trade deals with Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is the old Rhodesia, which was a vassal state of the British Empire. And again, they were oppressed and suppressed just to, I would say a little bit less the British Empire, more like the British monarchy had their hands in a lot of places in Africa. But no, so now Zimbabwe, another country in Africa, seems to be moving towards a new world of dominant leaders, and the West is losing its influence all over the world because the countries are realizing what the history, through studying the history, they're realizing what was done to them, and now they don't want that happen to them anymore or to their future generations.
Well, exactly. You see this shift in the world happening. And those grifters, that not just robbing the world, they're robbing you, brothers and sisters. They're robbing your hard-earned money via taxes, right? Like we'll use COVID, for example. How much money was printed and given away in terms of aid here in Canada and United States, not only to citizens, but also to corporations and government bodies. And now they discovered that at least $200 billion in COVID assist were stolen, right? The 200 billion. And I would say, Glenn, that's probably a conservative number, like way conservative number.
No, we really don't have a way of knowing the actual numbers. When they come out about the numbers with the economy, you have to take that with a grain of salt also, obviously. And when they tell you the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, or the inflation, the cost of living, when they tell you it's a certain amount, let's say 5%, you could double it and still be probably a little conservative in the actual number that it's affecting people on the front lines. So, 200 billion, that's fictitious number. You have no idea where that's going, and yet where did this money come from originally?
They were printed.
It was printed, right? Because all these countries, let's say Canada, United States, we have government comes out with budgets, but they only know how to spend. They don't know how to save and for a rainy day. And their rainy day is, we'll just fire up the printing presses and start printing more dollars into existence. And this will create the inflation. Hence, now we're having the troubles, and people are in debt, they've financed, and the debt levels, the payment back on their debt levels is going up. So capital has become very, very expensive. And that's going to have a negative ramification on the actual price of their asset values. In other words, let's say if you own a house and you're happy now it's worth $500,000, but then now it starts going down to $400,000. That's the new number, 400,000. But at the same time, you're only looking at the depreciated value of your home. You didn't look at the depreciated value of the dollars now at the same time. So if you have a real depreciation rate of inflation rate of 10%, that's 10% more every year that you have to take off of that 400,000, because that 400,000 will be buying you less. It's losing value as you're holding it. So you're getting hit from both sides. And it seems like the World Economic Forum, where you had Klaus Schwab saying, Agenda 2030, you will own nothing and be happy. You see it starting to work that way in real time.
Well, and that's also how the communist takeover works. It's not just about growing the size of the government, which has been growing here in Canada and the United States, but it's also to collapse the economy. Because the collapse of the economy, what happens? The middle class collapses, and the rich again richer, but poor again poor, but poor also again dependent on government programs, right? So you have the population that is dependent on the government. And that's how they keep the control, because that's how you keep the people at bay so they don't revolt, because don't bite the hand that feeds you. Like that's what we see specifically with the legacy media here in Canada, for example. If there is no monetary assist to those corporations like CBC, they cannot be run as a normal business that will collapse. So the government comes in here, I'll help you out, I'll give you money. And then you become a press release. And of course, they're going to take the money, because now they got all the bonuses, they got all those jobs, they make tons of money. Do you think they're going to ever tell the truth on TV, what's going on? Of course they're not. And the same happens throughout all levels of the society. So if you have somebody sitting on welfare, if you have somebody sitting on some kind of also social assist where they don't have to work, they have the food, they have the housing paid for and everything else, do you think they're going to go against the liberal government that provides them with those programs? No, they're going to vote for the same government, the same programs, and that's how it's happening. That's how the takeover happens. And meanwhile, the only people that can rebel against systems like this is middle class, and that's why middle class is being destroyed by planned gimmicks of the world and devalue and inflation of your monetary system, right, Glenn? And the crazy part is You know what's the next thing now? We're gonna close the show with some comedy. It's a sad comedy, but it is. So they did, you know, the ECB's, what's her name, Lagarde, right? She said that the reasons for the inflation she is the climate change, right? And the crazy thing is, so they go, if the climate change happening, and like, well, it's the, you know, it's the carbon and all this other stuff, it's the renewable energy, let's put more of the solar panels everywhere. But at the same time, you read articles like this, EU is to consider whether a sun's rays can be blocked. So they actually want to block the sun. Hold up, I don't get it. So on one end, you putting up solar panels everywhere. On the other hand, you want to block the sun. It makes absolute zero sense. And it's another thing. Imagine if they actually do control the sun, how much energy they do control, and how much dependent you become on the government. Do you know how they're going to block the sun, Glenn?
Yeah, it's geoengineering, putting particles, deflective particles like aluminum in the sky.
You being a conspirator, Glenn.
Yeah, you see, I was telling people many years ago that, well, they found ways to control the weather, and they were looking at me like I was from another planet. And I said, well, this has been going on for a long time. Geoengineering, it's a new a weapon in war, for example, and like bioengineering.
Cloud sitting, right? We read about cloud sitting.
Yeah, and chemtrails.
But now, okay, chemtrails, that's a conspiracy theory, Glenn. How dare you participate in conspiracy? Okay, brown sisters, watch this. Where is this video?
Distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow. Believe it or not, military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
So he's actually just said they've been doing it for a long, long time. Now, they said it's the radar practice thing. So they spraying heavy metals over populous areas is a radar practice. Yeah, I buy that as well. Glenn.
Yeah, and they also complain about plastic particles in the water supply. You know, that's caused from us, you know, not getting rid of our garbage effectively. All this was engineered also to create for the big corporations to be able to make packaging a lot less expensive. We are helping the big corporations make more money at our expense, and we're doing it being led through it's better for the environment. Yes.
Hold on, but remember this? It's better for the environment, Glenn, I'm old enough to remember when they stopped doing paper bags and started doing plastic bags because it was better for the environment. And then they realized, oh, there's plastic everywhere in the ocean. Let's do paper bags again. If you go to the store now and you ask for the bag, what do they give you? They give you a paper bag. So yeah, they're cutting trees to save the environment, but we need trees to offset the carbon. Brothers and sisters, don't listen to those idiots that run the world. They are idiots. And if you buy into the stuff that they're selling, you double idiot. I don't know how else to explain it. Because this makes no sense, Glenn. Absolutely makes no sense. There's been studied that electrical vehicles cause twice road damage than the petrol equivalent.
Yeah, that's because they're so heavy, right? So it can cause more damage, like over 2 times the amount of damage compared to regular ICE vehicles, internal combustion engines. That's just from the weight of the vehicle itself. And also, I'd like to say, locally, a lot of the roads here in Quebec, Montreal, Quebec, they're horrible because they're shoddily done. They use inferior products because it's a union who does it. So the union lobbies the government to allow it what it can do just to perpetually create work for itself. And who pays? The taxpayer pays. And when the government doesn't have enough, they ask for more money, more loans. Okay, they float out bonds. And when that's too expensive, then they pay off the debt on the bonds with printed money, and they create more inflation. So they're not really good at creating proper budgets, balancing the budget. It happened, if they do balance the budget, you can bet it was done by chance.
Oh, there's no chance of budget being balanced anytime soon. Okay, we're going to close the show with the story why the electrical vehicles and what's happening right now with the 15-minute cities and the grids, power grids in Texas. Like we talk about it many times, why electrical vehicle is nonsense. If they wanted to, like by year 2030, right, they want all the gas vehicles be off the road. We know for what reason, right? They want to control us, but it's physically impossible. They would have to rebuild the grid. But the infrastructure is so dilapidated in this country that it's falling apart everywhere. The bridges collapsing, the rail, and well, this I'll do this story real quick. The train that collapsed into the Yellowstone River with all kinds of chemicals. I think it's just to speed up the process of killing the environment because the chemtrails are not working fast enough. I think that's what it is.
She'll say they worked overnight to remove the most hazardous of the materials from that train, a flammable and toxic substance called sodium hydrosulfide. You can see the workers beginning to line up for the day here. Now, rail officials say that early Saturday morning, a train was going over the bridge over the Yellowstone River when the bridge collapsed. 10 rail cars derailing, 7 of them tumbling into the Yellowstone River, several of those dumping that molten sulfur and asphalt into the river that is considered one of the most pristine.
Glenn, accident?
Accident waiting for a place to happen when the government doesn't have enough money for its infrastructure and rebuilding and remaking the infrastructure. But at the same time, it just came out that the government has another $500 million worth of military vehicles to send to Ukraine. The priorities are mixed up, and North Americans should be up in real arms together against their government for where all this money is going.
And this is what's happening in Texas.
And changing weather patterns largely to blame. According to the feds, more than 70% of the nation's electricity grid is more than 25 years old. Here in Texas, ERCOT, the agency over the state power grid, however, is confident there will be enough supply, at least for now.
It does mean that the grid is under tighter conditions. It doesn't mean that there's, an imminent issue that the grid.
Well, imagine they added a little bit more electrical vehicles to the grid. Imagine the temperature went up a few degrees higher. Imagine any of those scenarios, and it's 25 years past due, and they're sending trillions of dollars to Ukraine.
And that's one of the states where you have a big population boom right now because it's a right-leaning state, and you get neutral people in left-leaning states. They've had enough, and they're saying, "Hey, let's get out of here." Last one out is a rotten egg, and they don't want to be the last one, obviously.
Okay, and meanwhile, China is a terrible country, and it is authoritarian, and Chinese government is communist, and they don't care about people and all that stuff. But what they're doing that is different from Western world, they're investing into infrastructure. They're building things like airports on top of the mountain peaks that are like 6,000 above the sea level, which I wasn't even sure if it's even possible. Glenn, did you see this? Look at that. That's definitely some kind of modern marvel. That falls in line with like building pyramids, and they just, I'm not sure if that's the same thing, but this probably has some kind of military application, obviously. But we're not building anything remotely like this in the West. Like you said, our infrastructure is just collapsing. Like that 95 bridge just collapsed in Philadelphia. The grids are way too old. Glenn, this has been an amazing show. Any last words for our audience?
Yeah, you see, one crazy thing to realize is China had the money to and the wherewithal to borrow even more money for all their infrastructure and their expansion, and not only in China but in other countries. And all that money came from globalism and offshoring all the manufacturing companies. In other words, in North America and in Europe, a lot of manufacturing went to China, where the companies could make a lot more money because the labor costs were a lot less. And so basically we consumed here in the West, and this money went to Chinese corporations, and then this money, a percentage of it, went towards the Chinese government to be able to increase spending on all their infrastructure projects. Meanwhile, in the West, our infrastructure projects were neglected, and now we're starting to see that.
Well, here you go. That's controlled demolition of the West. It started by things like, let's take out all the manufacturing and bring it to the communists. That was a really good idea. Brothers and sisters, don't listen to your government. Read the good book. Read the Bible. Listen to your inner self if you have the foundation to do so. And the Spirit will tell you. The Spirit comes from God. Connect to God. That's the proper source. But obviously, be educated. Listen to shows like Alex Ash Show and the men's channel at the Glen Zone. Other than that, we'll see you on the next one.